So the format is a little different from last week. This meeting is going to be recorded, minutes are going to be taken, and then the meeting minutes will be a matter of public record. So just want to make sure that everybody understands that. This is a regular board meeting. We're going to do a little business ahead of time, and then we will go into having our regular board meeting. I want to introduce the board members that are here. First, Emily Van, who's been on our board for 7 years. Got married on Saturday, so she's not here tonight, but she has, expressed concerns and so on at previous meetings. So she isn't with us, but we have plenty of information from Emily to take a look at if need be. Paul Robinson is here, and Joe Shimino is here, Kevin Donovan, and Courtney Gale is our administrator. So Courtney will be taking minutes and keeping things organized for us. I wanted to also introduce the folks from the planning board who were also members of the committee that worked with our consultants in order to put the document together. Well, Renee Ferraro is here, and Renee was the leader of our group, and Renee worked tirelessly on all of this, and I really appreciate all the work that she put into the document as it was developed. We also have Molly Gaudioso, did I say it? Okay, and Molly is from Barton & Judas, and John Steinmetz from Barton & Judas as well. I wanted to give you a little bit of background information so that we're on the same page as to how we got to this particular meeting. About 2 years ago, we started to take a look at zoning. Our zoning law, the current one, was established in 1990. Okay, it's 30-some years old, so it's pretty much outdated. In the meantime, we established a comprehensive plan, and that comprehensive plan combined the town and the village in one document. That was established in 2016. So it's our responsibility to make sure that our zoning law complements our comprehensive plan, and that's what we set out to do. So as we were looking around, we were reading, believe it or not, we were reading zoning laws from other communities similar to ours to see how their zoning laws were put together. We wanted to look at plans that followed the form-based option, and we kind of focused on those things. We took a look at Churchville's because Churchville followed that form-based plan, and they were close to our community, kind of same situation. And also we discovered that Barton & Judas were the consultants on that particular plan. And I don't know what year it was that they were adopted, but it was something that we wanted to look at, something that we wanted to compare to what we had, and then follow through with our process. So we signed the contract with Barton & Judas on October of 2019, and that was for a 2-year period. Meetings, consultations, phone calls, emails, which we did plenty of over the 2-year period. And the contract, and I want to share this information with you, that contract over a 2-year period and all the time and energy that these folks could give us was $36,000, which was the cost of a community zoning law establishment. Okay, so we were in the right ballpark. We investigated all of those things, and that contract was approved by the current board at that time, and then we started work. So the contract was signed in 2019, October, and our first meeting was held on November 20th, 2019. And that meeting was held here. It was a public meeting. The community was invited. We had a full group of folks here. Molly and John shared what a zoning law was or is, how information is collected to put into a zoning law, why a zoning law, how it works, and so on, and what were the components of the zoning law. People were here and discussed it, they asked questions, and so on, so we felt we were kind of in a good place to kick off the process. The planning committee, along with Kevin Donovan, who was the liaison liaison from the village board started to meet regularly at the planning board time, which is the third Wednesday of the month. And that continued on through COVID. We discovered how to use Zoom for our meetings. It wasn't the best, but we did it, and continued to meet throughout that process. In June, on June 9th of 2021, it was the responsibility of the committee to present the document to the board. And at that point in time, Renee did that. She went through the basics of the document, went through the format of the document, and so on. And after that, we went through a timeline. And that timeline presented to the board established the steps we needed to follow from there in order to move this document to a vote. Okay, all of those dates were shared, all of that information was presented to the board at that June 9th meeting. One of the things that was requested of the board was to submit any questions, concerns, anything that they wanted to comment on, any changes, whatever needed to be done, and the board was asked to submit those by June 23rd. The reason for that is so that we could put together any changes that were necessary, working with John and Molly, and get that document ready to send to the planning board in Genesee County. Genesee County Planning Board and the Director of Planning of Genesee County were to review that document as we sent it with the changes that were made and let us know what kind of a document we had, what they thought about it, if it was appropriate for our village, did it comprise all of the things it needed to, what kinds of things maybe we needed to change, what kinds of things needed to be added, taken out, whatever the process was. So that happened actually after the June 30th meeting. June 30th was a public hearing. And the public hearing, we had comments and we had discussions. The village board worked through the required State Environmental Quality Review Act, which is SEEKR. You may have heard of it, called SEEKR. It was adopted at that board meeting. There was unanimous, I'm sorry, it's a little dry here. Unanimous vote by the board to send the proposed law to the county at that particular meeting. On July 8th, we received word from the county that our document was considered excellent and that it used our comprehensive plan, that the law complemented our comprehensive plan, and they told us that it was a fine document. They were very pleased with what we had done, and it followed all the protocols, it matched our comprehensive plan, so we were pretty excited about the position we were in at that point in time. We considered that they were the experts taking a look at it because they had passed other zoning laws, they had sent others back to communities to redo, to add information, whatever. Well, we got through on the first shot, so we were excited that that had happened. On July 14th, taking that document that had been approved by the county, we then had a second public hearing. Okay? And at that public hearing, there were no public comments. Folks that had taken a look at that and read through it, when they came to that public hearing, they did not have any comments to make at that particular point in time. We had a couple of questions from board members, but no concerns or comments were expressed by the board members for that document at that public hearing. Again, feeling we were in very good shape to move on. Seeing that there were no concerns, the board proceeded to finalize the SEEKR. We need to continue that process. We had done part 1 at the previous meeting. We needed to do part 2 and determine whether or not we had negative declaration as far as environmental impact in the document. And we did that. We went through that process. The next point to move forward on was a resolution, and that resolution included the fact that we were now ready to bring our zoning law to fruition, to completion, and take a vote. And we did that. We took a vote and failed. So up to that point, we had no further comments, we had no further disagreement, we had no further question to make any changes. So we were kind of taken off guard as far as how the vote happened. At that point in time as well, our contract with Bergen and the Judas was over. They brought us to the point of vote, and which they did beautifully. And our accommodations from the county planning board, again, an excellent document. So we needed to do something. We have this document, and it's sitting here, and it's not finished, and we have a 1990 document. So we needed to talk about how that was going to change. What could we do? What was our path forward? So I contacted all of the members of the committee. I met with them one at a time. I also contacted our board and met with each of them one at a time to talk about what our path forward would be. It was decided that we would move forward and we would hire Bergen and the Judas to help us complete this process. So anything now that we work with them on is kind of a la carte as far as the things that happen. So when folks submit information to us and we send it to them, which is part of the process, it's a la carte. This meeting, the meeting last Thursday, in addition to our contract, all of those things are taking place. And we wanted to do that. We wanted to make sure we had another public hearing. We wanted to make sure people could ask questions. And again, tonight, we want to be sure that you have the opportunity to comment on this document. So we are moving forward. We're going to continue tonight with the public hearing. August 19th was the public information meeting. It was an interesting meeting. I think that we did have an opportunity to have discussions. We answered a lot of questions. It was very hot in here. But I think we made a lot of progress. Folks were thinking and thoughtful about the kinds of things that were being said. As we continue on tonight, our last public hearing for this document, we're going to take the opportunity to hear your comments. And that's what a formal public hearing is. We're going to be listening to the comments that you have. The board needs to listen and kind of determine by all of the other input that we have, all of the other information, all of the other emails, all of the other discussions, which there are multitudes as we've gone along with this process. We need to hear tonight the comments that are still there. They will be recorded as we move along. And there will be no vote tonight. It's not the place to do that. We still have to now resend our document for a second review and hopefully approval by the county. There have been a couple of adjustments made to the document. Not huge things, little things, a couple of words here and there, a couple of statements here and there, that, again, we needed to take care of. So those things are done. So at this point, I would like to, I don't know what time it is, officially open the public hearing for the proposed zoning law. We will give, I don't know how many people we have that want to speak. 5 people? 6 people? Okay. So we're going to give each person 3 minutes to speak so that we can, again, hear what you have to say. Understand that when the planning board committee, when the zoning law committee was charged with this project, we talked about the significance of a zoning law. We talked about how significant it is that this zoning law was the best document for our community. There are always going to be issues that, is this okay? Can we compromise? It's not going to be perfect for everyone. It's not perfect for me. But we worked really hard, and we did the best job that we could. And I think a couple other planning board members, Kate Milliman is here. Kate was on. Todd Parkle is here. Any other planning board members that we didn't see? Okay. So I want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone. Molly and John, we obviously could not have done it without you. Renee, again, Renee's leadership is incredible. We owe a lot to Renee and all the work that she did, and all the other members of the planning board committee. Kevin was there most every time. Joe came to meetings, so Joe was well in tune with what was the zoning law, what the zoning law looked like, and all the components of that, and I attended all the meetings as well. So we will start now with comments, and Robin, Dave, we're going to give you 3 minutes.
Okay. Did you want them to do the presentation?
Do you want us to speak first, or? I'm sorry. We even said that here.
We'll try to keep it.
Yeah, go ahead. I think it's a good idea. It's hot.
Yeah. Oh,
I was gonna say,
yep.
I don't think I
I'll
have it.
get you into it. And then I'll hand it over to you. So go for it.
Mayor, thank you for the summary. And did everyone hear me in the back? His name's George, in the blue shirt.
Where's George?
George, that you in the blue shirt?
Gary?
Gary, sorry.
Gary, isn't it?
All right, you can hear me? Got it, all right. Mayor, thank you for the background and the summary on where we've been and what we've been up to over the last 2 years, give or take. So, and for all of you, thank you for coming tonight. Molly and I are very passionate about zoning. If you're not, that's okay. I know it's not always the most compelling subject, but it's an important topic to talk about, especially in a community setting like this, because it does impact people's daily lives throughout the year.
You got it.
Now you think it works?
Yep.
Okay. So, actually, I'm going to go over here just so I can see the screen. Just because of the angle of the screen, it's hard for me to see over here. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Excellent. So what's the purpose of zoning? We're not trying to make you zoning experts, but we just want to touch on a few things over the next 15 minutes or so to help you kind of understand our point of view on things and where we've been and where we hope we're going. So the zoning law in the Village of Bergen is similar to other towns, cities. It's one part of many municipal laws. In some communities there's chapters, in Bergen there's laws. So for example, there's an animal control law in the Village of Bergen. There's a, I want to make sure I get the term right, parking restriction law in the Village of Bergen that deals with where you can park, where you can't park, things of that nature on public streets. The zoning law deals more with private property. So a public street, the zoning law doesn't regulate public streets. The parking restrictions law is one of the laws that does that. Zoning law regulates private property. So it's a very important law, and it's a part of a set of local laws for the Village of Bergen. The current law, I want to say code, I apologize if I waffle between law and code. We use them interchangeably in our profession. The current law, as the mayor said, was drafted in 1990 and amended in 2000. But you've actually had zoning for much longer than that. Courtney did a little research, and the earliest reference we can find is a reference to the, in 1978, the existing law back then was amended in 1978. So the village has had some form of zoning for at least 45 years. I'd be curious to know how much longer than that, but 45 plus years. So this is not a new topic, and as the mayor said, it's very common to have some type of zoning in upstate New York. The goals of this update were several. First and foremost, to improve the clarity and understanding of the local zoning law, remove overly complicated and conflicting regulations. Other are my examples after these. Just want to make sure. So for example, and I know you can't see this in the back, that's okay, I can see this. So your current law, you've got a neighborhood commercial district and then a central commercial district, and you've got uses and then dimensional requirements are in the back. So it's what we would consider relatively cumbersome to implement, review, read, and understand. So one of the things we did, we updated content, but I think one of the things we spent a lot of time on was updating formatting to make it as easy to use and as transparent as possible. Some communities, Bergen is not one of them, I think some communities make their zoning documents cumbersome on purpose, and we don't subscribe to that approach. So what we've done, instead of these pages and pages of lists and table back relegated to the appendix, we've done tables in the body of the document. We've articulated very clearly what the permitted uses are, what the specially permitted uses are, and what the dimensional requirements for those uses are. So we've tried to be as upfront and as clear as we possibly can. We've also tried to remove some conflicting provisions and, quite frankly, just some mistakes. So for example, in the neighborhood commercial district, you've got social organization or club, like an Elks or Lions Club or something like that, as a permitted use, and then you also have them listed as a specially permitted use. So if you wanted to open a club, what would the approval process be? I am a zoning quote expert, and I don't know what the answer would be. I think the default would be permitted. But again, so it's things like this that we're trying to clean up that are pretty low-hanging fruit. And then I'm going to go back. So now, some of the other goals I want to just touch on, but again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through them in a lot of detail. We're trying to remove barriers to investment whenever possible. Economic development is key to any community we've ever worked with. With COVID, home occupations are more common than they ever were. When I had my own consulting practice, it started as home occupation in Hilton. So for example, the current code, home occupations are specially permitted, we've permitted them. So we try to make it easier to do home occupations in the future than it has been in the past. We're trying to adapt to new market shifts like that, for example. We always want to ensure consistency with New York State law, whether it's how you approve variances or review variances, or how the code enforcement officer, it's my third presentation of the day, I apologize, how the code enforcement officer does his or her business. Whenever possible, we want to defer to New York State law on that, because they've already articulated how that could and should be done. We're trying to address non-conforming property issues, and you're going to talk a little bit about that later. And then finally, and I can't stress this enough, is to incorporate the zoning recommendations from the comprehensive plan. So we're trying to align the zoning code with the comprehensive plan that was done jointly with the town and completed in 2016. So in summary and closing for me, overall, we wanted to improve the legality, clarity, and consistency of Bergen's zoning land use vision and not rewrite the code in its entirety. We didn't start from scratch. We're kind of like, we take the doctor approach, first do no harm. So if the provisions are working, we keep them in there. Every community administers their code a little differently, and the code should reflect that. So we wanted to make sure we captured that for the Village of Bergen. Now I'll hand it over to Molly.
Okay, so, I don't think this is on. Oh, sure. I'm glad you held it.
Very observant.
So the zoning content, I want to make sure we have a chance to clarify a few things, and I know from the last meeting and over the last several weeks, there's been a lot of comments related to the commercial vehicle parking and RV parking provisions. But we just want to make sure, while we have your ear, is kind of make sure that, we have it out there that there's a lot of other things in here that are important and very beneficial to the village. So while that is one component of it, there's a lot of other pieces, as John said, that, we tried to look at and address. A big question that came out is, what is this kind of as John said before, sort of copy and paste, something that we just took from a different community and brought in for Bergen, and that is absolutely not the case. So within the existing code, this is kind of a quick little list of the various topics of things and regulations that are already in your zone. So it has enacting provisions, administrative provisions, all of those things that you need in order to have a law from New York State standpoint. It has review procedures like site plan, special permit. It deals with your own zoning districts. You have a series of those established, permitted uses, bulk and dimensional requirements, as John said. There are off-street parking requirements in there. There's some buffering language when you have maybe a commercial use that butts right up against a residential use, and some additional use regulations, things looking at, gas stations and what additional considerations or things like that you might need. So a lot of that, we built off of that where necessary, and we didn't change any of it where not necessary. I understand it looks very different because one of the things we tried to do was clean up that format. So rather than scrolling through several different sections to try to find what you're looking for, if you know you're looking for additional use regulations, it's under one section with the district and use regulations. So it's hopefully a little easier for you to get through, and we, try to clean that up. So your existing law was the base for this. Now, did we take some lessons and things from other communities and good practices and approach? Absolutely, we talked through those, but that was the ultimate goal, is to keep as much of yours as possible. One of the examples that, that came out of this, in addition to aligning with the comprehensive plan, is addressing some of the things that maybe you weren't aware of that were a problem under your current zoning law. So for example, there's some issues with permitted uses. So the same district that John referenced a few minutes ago, neighborhood commercial C1 lists adult uses, everybody's favorite exciting definition section to read in the zoning code. Adult uses are permitted by right in the C1 districts under your current zoning law. They are also permitted in C2 and industrial. So in addition to this purple, this is your existing zoning map, in addition to this purple area, this red area, that one, that one, that one, and that one could all, by right, have an adult use operation in there under your current zoning law. So that was something, through some conversations and things, that maybe that wasn't quite appropriate, having it adjacent to a lot of neighborhoods, things like that. So we revised those zoning limits to make sure that it's restricted to maybe more appropriate area, a little more buffered from residential, things like that, into the, what we now are calling the general industrial district. That's the purple there. So that's one way we try to address an issue. Second way we started to address another example of use issues. Right now, in your downtown, which is zone C2, upper floor apartments or residential units are not permitted, which means that all of these property owners who have these apartments, they're not conforming. If they're trying to make investments to their property, they have the additional burden of having to go through a variance procedure. You now put a limitation on their ability, right, to get a return from a reasonable use, right, in downtown from this property. So, again, things that really weren't known until we got into the law and started to see these things. So now we've revised that under the, again, just a renaming from C2 to, so we know what it means, Village Center Commercial. We allow for and permit upper floor residential units. So as future investment goes into those, absolutely okay. Gets a little easier, facilitates that investment. Non-conforming lot issues. Again, this is maybe not the use piece, this is more the physical aspects and regulations within districts. Right now, so this is a little snapshot here, Lake Ave, Parkview Drive. We have under the C1 district, which this is currently zoned, there is a minimum front setback requirement of 80 feet. Right now, every building, the Bergen sales building, Craft Supplies Unlimited, and this other structure here, all do not meet that requirement. This one's about 35 feet, it's about 7 feet, and that's much closer, even far less than the 35 feet there. So again, what this is saying, what your current regulations are saying, is that future investment, right, into these properties, you have that limitation. Again, it's that burden of the variance process. You're, putting a restraint on businesses who potentially want to make improvements to these properties, and sort of reducing the usability of the lot by forcing so much towards the back. So in this case, again, we reclassified that C1 district to neighborhood commercial. It's actually technically called that now. And we reduced that front setback to something more appropriate for this context. Again, a minimum of 15 feet. So that means that's conforming, we're all good. So a second piece of this, and this was really a huge component of the comprehensive plan, is talking a lot about village character, both in general as well as your downtown environment. So, a lot of discussion and recommendations, conversations that have been talking about compatibility with the village character, protecting residential neighborhoods and their character, and preserving historic character of downtown. Currently, your code does none of that. So I just have a couple examples. Through the comprehensive plan process, there was community preference survey done, and to kind of give you an idea, this isn't a hard and fast interpretation, but it's a way to kind of start to get to what people's thought processes are of various types and styles of development. So in this community preference survey, a series of images were shown. The image on the left here was one of the lower scoring. It's scored a 2.2, 2.3 out of 10, whereas the image on the right here, which looks a little bit more like your downtown, scored much higher, 8.8 out of 10. So a lot of contrast between these two, right? Not saying, right versus wrong, but a preference for certainly one side of the dollar over another. You may have remembered if you were here at the Thursday meeting, the mayor talked about one of the things that came out of a training that some village representatives attended with the county. There was a exercise looking at a potential development project coming into the village that was a cinder block building, no real windows, no landscaping, none of that, coming in, right into the community, and is that appropriate? And what was identified is something like this. So say somebody came in and said, well, I'm gonna take a building down in downtown, or I'm gonna use a parcel that currently doesn't have anything there, and I'm putting this in there. Okay, the current code doesn't even have a starting point for a conversation to say, well, we prefer you to move towards something a little like this, that looks a little bit more like our downtown, our village character. There's currently nothing. So we started to get some language together into the zoning law that supports conversations and investments that look more like this, so it's a little more compatible. I want to make it, at this point, I want to make it very clear, because I know there was probably some confusion on this too. All of the building design requirements, landscaping and screening requirements, and any of the parking design, like a parking lot design, don't apply to residential properties. So the things you see in there about trees or shrubs, that's not you and your house. that's just a commercial development. For example, somewhere else in the village, potentially a Dollar General, not an unfamiliar concept. Coming in, again, maybe having that not so desirable site development. The code gets you closer to this. The code doesn't say do this. It gets you closer to this. It has some landscaping requirements. It makes sure that the building looks a little bit more attractive than the cinder block situation in the upper section. So the last piece, and I know this is kind of what everybody really wants to hear about and talk about, we do want to make sure we give a little background and clarification while we have it here on some of the commercial vehicles and RV parking requirements that are in there. A big question is why even regulate them in the first place? And the major answer to that is safety and visibility on residential streets. If you're kind of looking at this picture, this person's got several vehicles in their property, and the parts in the front of their property, and then there's two sort of recreational commercial vehicle kind of joint here, marked over the sidewalk, and most people, as a lot of you have told us throughout meetings, are good neighbors, right? You're not trying to block anybody's view. You're pulling it back. You're doing what you can, on your property, and that is exactly what this is intended to do. In the event that that's not the case, the village now has some regulation that can ensure that the right thing is done, and you don't end up in a visibility problem like this. So the current zoning does speak to parking in the front yard and having some level of setback, not blocking visibility, but it was very general, and you had no ability to have any standard for what creates visibility. So a couple things before we talk about the clarifications and the regulations. Want to make sure that we all understand what the zoning law is actually defining as a commercial vehicle or as an RV. In the law, a commercial vehicle is considered a vehicle that exceeds 10,001 pounds in gross motor vehicle weight when empty, and or exceeding 25 feet in length. So a lot of that is very large trucks, things like that. All of these examples shown here, pickup trucks, minivans, utility vans, crew pickups, full-size pickups, step vans, even bigger utility vans, all of these, by what this is going by the United States Department of Transportation's classifications, are permitted. So if you have a utility van that you use for, you're running a plumbing business, something like that, you have a pickup truck, contracting, all that, you're good. That's fine, you don't meet this definition. So that the regulations under commercial vehicles don't apply to that pickup truck, box truck, etc. Even if it's used for commercial purposes. Secondly, the recreational vehicles, it does not include things, those are specifically identified as recreational camping, travel use, trailers, things like that. It's not dirt bikes, ATVs, motorcycles, any of those things. I know sometimes colloquially, we can start to lump a lot of things in here, but that's the importance of the definition section in the zoning law as well, is to clarify exactly what this applies to. So we want to make sure that's clear. Last point here, the clarifications. Previously, there were some specific requirements about it being parked behind the front building line. In that first round of comments that came through, those were passed to us. We talked about, well, we understand the context of people's properties might be a little different. It might not be wholly feasible for you to park completely behind your front building line. That's okay. The intent was maintain visibility. So what we included here is a context-sensitive regulation that says where the conditions of the property allow. So otherwise, you can please go back as far as you can to maintain that visibility. And this is important, again, because as potentially more people in the village, with COVID and things like that are just sort of changing the nature of how we start to live and travel, you might have more RVs. And if you've got 4 or 5 parked on your street and they're all up and over the sidewalk, and now you've got some problems with driveways, people pulling out, visibility, all of that. So that's the purpose of this. It is not, trying to put you in a hard and fast position of, well, get it in a garage, and if you don't have a garage big enough, build one. That's not what this says. This just says do it to the greatest extent practical. Then 2 potential edits. Again, so some conversations, we had great conversations. I see a lot of familiar faces from the meeting on Thursday. We had some great conversations about some of your thoughts on the language that was there, and some pieces we realized that might need a little more clarification. So one was a comment about the ownership requirement. If you're storing your vehicle on your property, right, it should be owned by you. Well, does that preclude my friend who came in his camper parking in my driveway? By the letter of the law, yes, but that wasn't the intent. So what we're going to look to do is, with the board's direction, try to clarify that, make sure that the requirement really applies to long-term storage or parking of the vehicle on the property. It's not about, your cousin coming to visit. And the second piece, again, we heard some comments about needing a little flexibility with respect to the commercial vehicle weight. One gentleman in particular was talking about there's a truck that he utilizes for emergency purposes. It's parked on his property once every couple of weeks. Again, not the intent of the law to prohibit that. So we can look to up that, again, that max weight, to give a little wiggle room. Talk to him, what do you think the order of magnitude is on that? He felt pretty comfortable with just kind of going from 10,001 to 11,000. So, again, we're still preventing the semi-truck from being parked on somebody's property, and causing some real visibility problems. But instead, trying to make sure we're accommodating the situations that a lot of people in the village are facing. And that's it. So we'll stop talking. I believe now we'll hear from you instead. Yeah.
Okay, now we're getting on track. So, at this point, we're going to open the public hearing. And Robin, if you like the microphone or you want to speak, how about it? Either way is fine. Thank you very much.
So for those of you who don't really know me very well, my first career was, I spent 28 years interpreting and applying the law. And so the first thing that I did when it was brought to my attention that there was a zoning law rework in the works was to go read the comprehensive plan. And then I came to meetings, and as many as I could make with my schedule, to just be part of the process, see what was going on, follow along and offer input where I could. So, having committed myself to that, I would just encourage the board to vote positively on this. I do believe, and I didn't realize Anna was going to give all that timeline and stuff. I agree with the county that this code, proposed code, law, however you want to phrase it, is very much in line with our comprehensive plan, and I think it's going to help us all in the village move forward with some development that we would like to see in terms of commercial properties and help us be better neighbors to one another. I have a vested interest in this process. I'm just going to put that out there. I have, for those of you who don't know, I live in the old Dilcher property on Rochester Street that has a 3,800 square foot garage that right now I cannot do anything with. It's considered nuisance space by realtors. It would cost more to tear it down than it would add to my property value. So my elderly parents just happen to be in need of a place to live. And our plan is, once this is passed, to put in a handicapped accessible apartment in there for them to live out the remaining days, and then eventually have that as a rental property available in the village. I do not believe there is any handicapped accessible rental property in the village other than 2 ground floor units in Arlington Manor. So that can be a great asset to a community. I understand from being around last week at the open house that a lot of people with RVs felt singled out. And to you, I just want to say, having been part of this process long term, that was never the intent. It was just to make this a better place for all of us to live. So I hope you guys get your questions answered tonight. But I would just encourage you to vote yes the next time around, whenever that vote occurs, because I think this is a really great thing for our community.
Thank you, Robin. Randall Hill?
First of all, I want to thank the board for all the work they put into this, and also for listening to us. When this popped up on social media about the RV parking, which is the part I'm concerned about, you know, we came here last week and talked, and we saw changes, and so I appreciate that. So you're listening. I see again with your presentation today, you heard some of the things that we said last week. So again, I appreciate your listening. I think this is important that we get this right, because if we don't, you know, it's going to end up being something that, you know, as an RV owner, it gets used against me someday, and that's what I'm afraid of. If the wording isn't right and it's not clear for both sides, the RV owner and the non-RV owner, that someday someone's going to have that turned around, and where they think they're compliant, someone's going to say you're not, and then there's going to be people in the future who didn't write this zoning law making a determination on who's right and who's wrong. So the more we can do to make that clear, the better we're going to be. I do have some suggestions that I sent to the mayor over the weekend that I just wanted to bring up. I won't go through line by line because you do have a copy of it, and I can give this to anyone who wants it. But there was a couple of things that kind of struck me that I thought weren't clear. I think you've addressed the term about parked and stored. I think stored is a better term. You know, park is in transit, that, you know, someone can park on your property, but stored is there for a period of time. In the second section on the RV part, there was a term in here that said, owned by full-time resident. I'm curious, what are you defining full-time? That to me could be, you know, I don't know what it means. And I'm questioning that. Are you a resident? Are we segregating residents to full-time and non-full-time? And what's a non-full-time resident? I think this is kind of sketchy on that part. I know a lot of rewording has been done about the setback part of it, and making that a little more wiggle room in it, I guess is what you're saying, because not everybody has the capability to set back something to the front line of their property. I guess it's still a little sketchy, and I think you need to kind of determine, are you drawing a line here, or are you making a suggestion? And it needs to be clear that it's a suggestion, because someone will read it as a line, and saying, your RV is not past your, it says here it needs to be past the front line of your home, and your RV is not there. And I think that could be an issue down in the future, like I was talking. I think you're getting the same thing when you're talking about the distance from the street. And your setback on that is, to be the greatest for visibility. The previous law said 10 feet. I think you need to have a minimum in there to make it clear. The same thing on property lines. We've walked around this village a lot, and not every house is the same. Not every property line is the same. I'm in the section of the town that has a much more suburban type of homes that are typically built to the easement of each side of the property line, and we don't have a lot of room there to do a minimum of 5 feet or more from that property line. And so there again, I think you need to define, is it a suggestion or is it a requirement, to make it clear. And then the last one on here was, the number 6 was, the landscaping. There again, I believe you're trying to put a suggestion there about landscaping. It just needs to be a little bit more defined, I think, that is a suggestion and it's not a requirement.
It should say encouraged.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit better. I just think it just makes to make sure that someone doesn't read it the other way and say, yeah, you put your RV here and it's right next to my property, and there's no fence or landscaping or anything like that. So those are my concerns, and I do appreciate the opportunity to bring them up to here. I think that all of us looks at this zoning law that you guys are working on, that you're doing a great thing about overall for the village, but we're all zoning in and how it affects us. And so it's nothing against what you're trying to do, everything else. I think it's great. I'd rather have you guys do it than me. But when it comes to when it affects me, it's not going to be able to speak up and share my part. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ron Bailey?
I'm going to change the subject a little bit. I'm going to be talking about adult uses. And I sent this to the village earlier. My proposal is to eliminate section 5.5 adult uses. Right. The zoning law update makes reference to studies conducted by the village of Bergen and makes reference to similar studies in establishments operating as adult uses. Detrimental and harmful impacts to the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of a community results. It is this detrimental, harmful impact on adult bookstores, adult cabarets, adult entertainment cabarets, adult motion picture theaters, adult motels, massage establishments, body rub establishments, peep shows, and so forth, should not be allowed in the village, within the village of Bergen. Not to be allowed in any district, even the zoning law presently states that it allows it in the general industrial district. Therefore, it's recommended to delete section 5.5, page 21, paragraph A, purpose, paragraph B, restrictions 1 through 4. Just having the listed adult establishments in any district would have a net negative effect on the type of visitors that would come to our village. Therefore, no adult uses should be allowed anywhere in the district of the village of Bergen. That's my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. What Molly's asking is, Mr. Bailey sent me that letter, and we did some research about that. Molly contacted a municipal attorney to determine whether or not we can eliminate that information. So if Molly wants to take that, I don't have my paper, but
Yeah, no, so that that's something as practitioners, we've always understood. This was prompted a great question for us as professionals. We've always understood that it's not something that communities can prohibit outright. But to be honest, we weren't exactly 100% sure why. So we talked to a municipal land use attorney that we work with frequently. He's, really great. We consulted. It's a treatise, New York State zoning law and practice. It's essentially the basis by which all of New York State land, real property practice and law is based. The moral of the story is adult uses are protected by the First Amendment. There's been a series, you're not alone in feeling that way. We deal with this in a lot of communities, and unfortunately, every community has lost that battle, trying to prohibit it. So what you are able to do, the standards that are in that treatise that you can take a look at, you are, exactly to your point, well within your right to try to mitigate those negative impacts. Clearly, you don't want it next to residential, by schools, public uses, churches, things like that. But you do have to allow for it in some way. So like I touched on in the presentation, you currently actually allow it in many districts that I think would be not amenable. So we did scale that back to general industrial, as you mentioned, and there are distance requirements, there are regulations in there that were carried over. Those are existing, that were carried over and making sure that, there's no inappropriate things that are visible. So unfortunately, we'd love to strike that for you, but we just can't.
Okay, well, Connor, can we just eliminate all that verbiage about the types of business that would be considered adult uses?
No, because then you would be opening the door for someone to make the case that they aren't one.
Well, no. They have to, anyone opening a new business must come before the board, okay? And you submit their business plan, okay? That's when you find out, okay? And you still have control over that.
Only if you specifically state in your zoning law that you do